What's up everybody, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports, and I'm here today with this S&B cold air intake kit for the 11 to 14 6.2 liter Ford Raptor. S&B is pretty standard as far as how they do these cold air intakes. There's basically two options where you either get a dry filter or an oiled filter. The one we have here is dry, but the install is going to be the same regardless. As you can see on this end of the bench, you're going to have a new top half for your airbox with this little silicone coupler. Obviously the new filter itself. We've also got the little plexiglass top for it. The adapter that goes into the fender, and then you have your two separate pipes that run into the actual throttle body, as well as another coupler, and of course your hardware all the way over here, which has stickers, instructions, and then everything you need to get this all tightened up and bolted together. Essentially, the idea with this kit is to swap out that basic factory intake with just the flimsy little paper filter that goes in there, as well as the big resonator box on top of the engine with a new cleaner, higher flowing setup that's going to allow for a bit more power, but also a little bit of a change in throttle response and just better airflow. And as a plus, if you like the additional sound, this is going to be a bit louder than the factory intake, so you get that nice intake tone when you get on the throttle and you're cruising around. A quick side note for those of you located in California or other states that apply to the CARB emission standards, this is actually CARB legal, so you will get a little sticker with the info you need for your kit that you can put on there, and this won't affect the way your vehicle gets through inspection and isn't going to cause you any issues with smog. With all the details out of the way, let's go ahead and get this thing installed on our Raptor. The first thing we're going to do on the install is come over to our battery, and we're going to disconnect the negative terminal here, which you'll just use an 8mm socket for. This is going to prevent us having any electrical issues with the airflow sensor when we get to the point of removing that. Now coming over to the front of our airbox, we're going to go ahead and pull this red tab underneath the harness for the airflow sensor, and that's going to allow us to disconnect the wiring harness. And then we can come in where these Torx heads are and remove the sensor itself. Now when you remove your airflow sensor, go ahead and take note of which way it's facing because it is directional. And when you do install the new intake, it should only go in one way, but you want to make sure you get that right. Now move over to this first hose clamp right after the sensor, and you're going to take your nut driver and loosen this up. Then we'll come around to this far back area of the tube and remove the other hose clamp. Now we're going to go ahead and grab this front section of the hose and remove it from the airbox. This is typically on here pretty tight, so you may need to use a body tool to pry slightly on the hose and then push it off. Behind the airbox down here, you'll find 3 clamps that you can remove. When you push those back, you can lift this forward and take the entire top half off. With that out of the way, we can also remove our factory paper filter. Now you're going to go ahead and grab your 13mm socket and ratchet so you can loosen up the 2 screws holding in the lower section of the airbox. To get to the second bolt, you'll probably have to disconnect the sensor at the rear. That'll give you a bit of extra clearance, then you can get your ratchet and your socket around. With both bolts removed, we're going to be able to lift the bottom of the airbox, which is held in with 2 rubber grommets here. It usually just takes some pressure to pop it up. And then once it's loosed, you can slide this forward and have access to the snorkel at the side. One thing to be mindful of here is you do have a coolant line running along the box as well as some wiring behind this, so you want to make sure you don't tear or pinch any of these. That way when you install the rest of it, you don't have any problems down the road. Now removing this snorkel from the side of your airbox is one of the trickier parts of the install because it is punched in so tight. We're going to use this little trim removal tool as kind of a pry bar to push down, so these 2 tabs will be forced out of the way of the hole. So here's the factory snorkel we took out. As you can see, it's kind of a small circular shape. The new S&B silicone one is made of their high quality silicone, which is an upgrade in itself, but you can see it's also a much larger diameter to allow for a little bit more airflow. We'll go ahead and just pinch this down, kind of work it into the side of the box. You may just have to give it a few little flexes around the corners. And then just like that, you should have it in place. With your new silicone snorkel in place, we can go ahead and take this lower half of the airbox and get it reseated into position. You just want to make sure that your bolt holes are going to line up, that you're clear of all your lines and electricals, and then once that's seated in place, we can get this tightened back down. Now that we've got the lower section of the airbox snugged back into place, just make sure your hood sensor isn't bent up, and then go ahead and reconnect the electrical harness to the sensor. Now coming back around to the actual inlet tube from the intake, we're going to go ahead and pry this off, make some space. Moving over to the side of this resonator box, go ahead and disconnect this first rubber hose. Then the next one has a plastic clamp on it where you'll have to push the little gray tab down and pull back to release it. Moving around to the other side of the resonator box, there is a clamp attached here with just a little Christmas tree on the inside, so you can use a pry tool or a screwdriver to remove this from the box. Next, we're going to remove the two 10mm bolts holding the resonator box on top of the engine. Now we're going to go ahead and reach towards the top of this valve cover, push that gray tab to release the clamp, and completely remove this section of hose. And then after that, we can also remove this top hose. You may have to twist it just a bit to get it to kind of break free from the heat sealing it on there. Now, just for a reference, this one that came off the valve cover is actually a PCV vent line, and the one that came off back here is a vacuum line that runs through this brake booster setup. But they do provide two longer lines that we're going to replace in a little bit. Next, go ahead and take your nut driver and loosen up this hose clamp on the plastic coupler on the throttle body. Now we've got that loose, we can go ahead and just wiggle this forward to pop it off. Now with all the factory intake components removed off the top of the motor, let's walk over to the bench and get our S&B put together so we can drop it in. So the first thing is where these two threaded ports are. We have two plastic adapters to go into them for those hoses. So if you're looking at it straight on, there's a part number right here. Next to the part number, you're going to want to thread in the smaller black adapter. Then of course the other side is going to be the white one. All right, and once you have them a little bit tight by hand, we can go ahead and take a wrench and get them all the way tightened down. Because these are plastic, you do want to be careful tightening them down so that you don't cross up the threads or break anything. Now that we've got both these plastic fittings installed, we can go ahead and work on our airflow sensor. S&B does provide you a little foam gasket as well as the hardware and an adapter plate, so that way you can use your factory sensor in this tube. So we're gonna go ahead and sandwich this together first. Go, get the holes lined up. Obviously we'll start hand tight first just to get these threaded into the inserts. You want to make sure as you tighten those that you tighten it evenly and you get this sealed on here nice and tight. That gasket's going to help fill and prevent any air leaks along the way, but if you don't get this pushed down enough, you will get a leak there and that can trigger an engine code. With this little adapter installed, now we can take our factory airflow sensor and the two screws that S&B provides and slot this into place. Once again, you want to make sure you have it pointed the right direction, but really the holes will only line up if you do have it facing the correct way. So you can see we have two openings right there. Once again, make sure you tighten that sensor down nice and even and make sure it's on there solid so you don't have any leaks. And once that's locked in, we're all done with this pipe. With our two fittings installed and the airflow sensor in this tube, the only other thing we have to worry about now is these silicone couplers that go on the ends. All you do is basically just slide it over the little lip there. So with these on, we can also take our hose clamps, slide those on, and tighten them down a little bit, but we don't want to lock it on super tight because we still need to be able to slide this onto the truck. There we go. So I've got these on just tight enough now that they don't fall off, but still loose enough that we're going to be able to slide these over the throttle body and this other tube. So now we're going to assemble the top section of the airbox. And the first thing you want to do is take this lid and flip it around. You'll see there's this oblong hole on the back and we have a coupler that's made to fit it. Now this coupler does have a little tab and you want to make sure that that tab is pointed down towards the bottom. So we're just going to position this over the hole and a little bit of pressure will just pop that into place. Then we're going to go ahead and grab this hose clamp and you may have to loosen it slightly to get it to fit. Ours is just loose enough here. It looks like we're going to be able to get it on. Then you're going to want to grab the snorkel with this kind of fat oblong section on the end, and this is going to insert through the coupler. Now it is a pretty tight fit, so it's going to take a bit of pressure to get it in here. There we go. Now looking into the lid from the bottom here, we're going to grab our filter, and you want to make sure that the little screw that tightens your hose clamp on this filter is pointed through the window, so that way you can retighten or loosen this from inside the truck without it being face down in the airbox. Drop this into place and you'll give it some pressure so it fits over the end of that snorkel. With both these sections of our new S&B intake assembled, let's go ahead and jump back into the engine bay and get this thing installed. Now that we're back in the engine bay, we'll go ahead and take this first section of tubing with the two fittings for the hoses towards the throttle body, and we're going to just slide this coupler into place And we'll tighten it down slightly, but we're gonna still leave it a little bit loose in case we have to rotate or position this a little differently once we get the front section on. We've got our front section of the intake here, and there's 4 tabs along the front that are gonna slot into that lower section of the airbox. So we're gonna kind of tilt it in, filter first, and get those tabs pushed into place. And then we can set this a little bit more flat and slide the couplers together, just like that. Also, while you're up here at the front of your airbox, make sure you reattach these 3 little clips on the back side. This will ensure that it stays sealed and this thing doesn't pop open when you're driving. Now we're gonna take this new PCV line that was included in our kit and attach the 2 little hose clamps to the end. Then we can go ahead and connect this to the valve cover down here, and we'll go ahead and pop it onto the fitting in the intake. Now we're gonna take our extra vacuum line that they provided in the kit, and I'm just gonna kind of slide this under the PCV that we installed and push it into place. There's not any hose clamps on this one, but it doesn't really have a lot of pressure or anything coming through it. Just getting it slotted in and making sure it's sealed should be good to go. Now at the front section of our intake, you'll see we still have the factory harness for that airflow sensor, and this is obviously not long enough to reach it in the new location, but S&B does include this extension. So we're gonna go ahead and attach that. It'll kind of click into place, and then you'll want to actually kind of lift up on this black tab and push the red one in so it clicks, and that's just going to lock it so it doesn't pull apart. Then we'll go ahead and feed this underneath the intake snorkel and come around to the other side. And as you can see, the sensor is right there, so we can go ahead and clip this into place. And sort of the same thing, just lift up on that black tab, push the red one in, and that'll lock it. Then S&B also provides some extra zip ties to kind of tie up the slack, so we're gonna go ahead and attach one to this vacuum line real quick, just to keep this from dangling on the top of the motor. With everything in position and all connected, we know that we've got this dialed in the way that we want it, so now we just have to go back and tighten down all of our hose clamps so everything seals up properly. Now we're gonna go ahead and take our little plexiglass window and drop this into place over the filter. And then S&B gives you a little bit of hardware to attach this. You'll have 4 screws with 4 little rubber washers, and you can just kind of slide the rubber washer onto the screw. Now the very last step in this install is to remember to come back and reattach the ground. And we're gonna go ahead and just tighten that back down. Well guys, that's gonna wrap up our install on this S&B cold air intake for the 6.2 V8. And we'll throw in a couple quick sound clips so you can kind of hear the suction noise that it makes and what it's like when you get on the throttle, just hearing it from under the hood. And if you guys are interested in picking up one of these kits for your Raptor, you can head down that description below, click the link, it'll shoot you over to our website, and we will see you guys next time.